All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Today we have got the residential sale, St. Louis Association of Realtors residential sale contract. It is the contract many of you use to write offers. The sun this morning is brutal. I've got the blinds closed, but it's blinding me. But anyway, good morning, Leo. Good morning, Brittany. Good morning, everybody watching. So we are going to run through the residential sale contract today. And what I'm going to do is share my screen with you all so that we can start going through this. Now, the reason for really understanding the contract, I think understanding the contract is one of the most important things we can do, because when you fully understand the contract, I'm going to blow it up a little bit here. Can everybody see that okay? Hopefully you can. So when you fully understand, morning, Kathy. Good morning, Kathy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being on. So when you fully understand the contract, it gives you a lot of power, honestly, because to be quite frank, a lot of agents don't know the contract. There are many agents that write contracts and have never fully read the contract. They don't fully understand it. They fill in the blanks, submit the offer, and they don't really know the timelines. They don't really know all the verbiage written in the contract. So I think it's extremely important that we all know our contract inside and out. And the more we know it, the better we're going to be, the more confident we're going to be when we submit offers. And it's just going to make things go a lot smoother. So I'm going to run through this today. Excuse me. And let's just get started. So residential sale contract. I'm going to try to, let me see if I can make this. There we go. A little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. And let's get rid of this banner just to get this out of the way. There we go. Okay, cool. So first thing we're going to cover is, again, residential sale contract. So first thing I want to mention, you want to make sure, see this date up here, 01-25. This is the newest form, the newest version of the sale contract. So if you're writing offers on anything other than this, you need to stop and go get this new version. It should have been auto-updated into .loop, DocuSign, Forms R Us. They should have all been auto-populated, but just make 100% certain of that when you submit an offer, make sure you're writing it on a form that has this date here, right here. Very important, because this is the newest version. This is the version you want to be using. So if you see a 24 or an older year, you want to stop, you want to go get the correct version. So make sure of that, very, very important. Now, we're going to go line by line through this contract. So I pre-filled it out. Obviously the date, you would put today's date. You're going to put your client's names here. So the example I put here was John, and I put a middle initial. Very important to put a middle initial, especially when people have a very common name like Smith. John M. Smith and Jane C. Smith, and then in parentheses, I put a married couple. They are married. Now, if they're not married, you don't put a married couple, obviously. But if they are, you would put that. Now, the reason for putting the middle initial is because it helps title out quite a bit. Now, when title does a title search, especially when people have very common names like this, they may come back to you and say, hey, John Smith here has a pending litigation. John Smith has a lien against him, a mechanics lien, or whatever the case may be, a default, something like that. And chances are it's the incorrect John Smith, but it's a very common name. So if you put the middle initial, that will help title when they do their title search, kind of get rid of any people that are not John M. Smith. So put the middle initial for everybody. Just my personal little tip here. It's going to help your title company out a lot and maybe save some panic mode for your client when title comes back and says, hey, you've got a lien against you for 10 grand or something like that. And they freak out. They're like, no, I don't, So put the middle initial. That will certainly help. Now, municipality. If it's in a municipality, Chesterfield, or if unincorporated, but for my example here, it's in Chesterfield, the county of St. Louis. So you're going to put the municipality and the county. Seller owns, I'm going to put the full legal address or the full address, 123 Main Street, Chesterfield, Missouri, 63017. So pretty basic stuff there. Now, let's get into inclusions and exclusions. So let's read this together. Number 7 here. This contract, not the seller's disclosure statement, the MLS, or other promotional material, provides for what is to be included in the sale. That is very important because we've had issues in the past where people say, well, it was in the seller's disclosure, so it needs to stay, or whatever the case may be. Seller's disclosure is not the contract. If you want things to stay with the property or be removed from the property, it has to be written in this contract. It cannot be stated in the MLS. And we say, well, it was in the MLS, so this is what they have to do. No, it has to be in the contract. So this contract, not the seller's disclosure statement, the MLS or promotional material, provides for what is to be included in the sale. To avoid any misunderstanding, the parties are urged to list as included or excluded any items which may be subject to question or unclear as to being considered a fixture, such as electronic equipment. The purchase price includes all existing improvements on the property, if any, appurtenances, fixtures, and equipment, which seller guarantees to own free and clear, including, and now we've got a list of all of our included things that are staying with the property. So everything from line 12 to 27, if the property has it, it's staying. Now, I'll give you an example, a central vacuum system. If the property, because I've had this come up in the past, people say, well, I don't have a central vacuum system. They freak out, buyers will freak out. No, it's only if your property has this, it needs to stay. So if the property doesn't have a central vac system, your client doesn't have to put one in. It's just stating that if the property does have a central vac system, it's included. So everything listed here, all keys and remote entry controls, electric garage door openers and controls, exterior lighting, mailbox, invisible pet fence systems, heating, HVAC, security, and alarms. Now, here's a big one that pops up, ring camera. So this is a little bit of a gray area. People are like, can I take my ring camera? Do I have to keep my ring camera? It's a gray area. So I feel it could fall under a security feature, but some people will argue that. So what I would tell your client ahead of time, if you want to take your ring camera, remove it prior to putting your house on the market. That way it's not going to raise any red flags, or, nowadays they're pretty cost effective as well. Most people are okay with leaving them. Bring it up at the listing. I saw you have a ring camera. Do you want to take that with you, or would you like to just keep it on the house and leave it? If you want to take it with you, it might not be a bad idea for us to just remove it now. But if you want to leave it, then that's fine too. Just address that up front. It'll save a little bit of headache later on in the toward the end of when it gets to closing. Dishwashers, ovens, ranges, stoves, built-in microwaves. So it has to be built in. If it's a microwave that is sitting on the counter, doesn't stay. If it's a microwave, have you seen those? You see some properties that have like in the island, it's not a built-in microwave, but it's like insert basically that the microwave can sit in. That does not stay. If it's a built-in microwave, it does stay. But if it's just sitting in that little insert, or if it's sitting on the kitchen counter, it doesn't stay. So keep that in mind as well. If your client wants that microwave, write it in the contract. Attached gas barbecue grills, lighting, artificial fireplace logs, attached fireplace equipment and doors. So again, when in doubt, write it out. If you're uncertain about something, that's kind of the golden rule. When in doubt, write it out. If you're uncertain if something's staying or not and your client wants it, write it in the offer. So what I put here, just for an example, I put kitchen refrigerator. So kitchen refrigerator, question here. Let's see. When they remove the ring camera, they shouldn't be leaving it with just wires. Yeah, agreed. No, good point. Yeah, don't do that. Don't just leave wires sticking out. Put a doorbell back on. So again, Ring doorbells, in my opinion, are pretty inexpensive now. So I would just leave it. But no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, don't leave wires sticking out. That just makes for a bad first impression too when people walk up to the house. So I would replace it with a doorbell. Good point, Brittany. Kitchen refrigerator is what I wrote in here. This is something that gets missed a lot. Also, if your client wants the washer and dryer as well, you have to write it in the contract. You can't just assume, or just because the client said, or the seller says, oh yeah, the seller's agent, yeah, they're probably gonna leave that, or they're gonna leave that. There's nothing in writing stating they have to leave it. So even though they said, yeah, they're gonna leave the washer and dryer, I would write it in the contract, because let's say we get to inspections and things get a little shaky and it gets a little tense, and then we get it resolved and everyone's happy, but now the seller's not super happy, and they say, well, you know what, we're just gonna take the washer and dryer now. They move out, washer and dryer's gone, your client moves in, they call you, where's the washer and dryer? Well, there was nothing written in the offer stating the seller had to leave. It was just a verbal, which is a lot harder to go after and get. So when in doubt, write it out. Also be cognizant or be aware that you don't want to put too much personal property in this as well. Lenders don't like to see a ton of personal property. And so when What does that mean? It means let's not write in tons of stuff like the pool table and the arcade games downstairs and the foosball table and all of this other stuff. We don't want to write too much of that in. So we want to limit the amount of things. Now, if you need to do that, you can do a personal property rider. That's going to be separate from this, or personal property document. That's going to be separate for this, that for things to stay that maybe the seller and buyer are agreeing to purchase or sell. So don't write all of that in the contract though. Kitchen refrigerator, washer and dryer, pretty common. Basement refrigerator, garage refrigerator, things like that, pretty normal. Now, the following items are excluded. So this would be if you have something, I put an example here. Let's say there's an old dilapidated shed in the backyard and your client doesn't want to mess with getting rid of it. Write it in the contract. Seller to remove shed from backyard prior to closing. Things like that. Maybe there's an old broken down swing set or an old above ground pool or a hot tub that doesn't work or things like that. Write it in the contract and have it removed. Sorry, I'm taking a look at the comments here as well. Have it removed prior to closing. So that's where you would write that in, is in the exclusions right here on line 30. Now, purchase price. So purchase price, we're going to put our purchase price in here on line 33. And then this is where, and for my example here, my client did not need closing costs. But if my client needed closing costs, this is where I would write it in. If they needed 3% closing cost or 2% or 1% or 5%, whatever the case may be, that's where I would write in the percentage here. And then that would be something we would be asking the seller to credit the buyer for. Earnest money, I put $5,000. General rule of thumb would be 1% of the sale price for earnest money. So if you're ever kind of like, how much should we put, this or that, pretty standard is 1% of the sale price. So I put $5,000. I put to be delivered to the title company of your choosing. I put Freedom Title within 5 days, or it auto-populates to 5 days as well. Here's something you're going to see. When I write offers, I fill just about every line out. And the reason I do that, you don't have to, because it says here 5 days, you fill it in, or 5 days if none stated. I've always been in the habit of filling out every line, because I found when I didn't, clients would ask about it. When I sent the offer over, they'd be like, well, what about this? This is blank. Even though it says right here 5 days if none stated, it just brings up for more questions. So in my experience, I like to fill everything in as much as possible. So that way it doesn't leave like, they don't, in the client's mind, they're not thinking, well, did they forget to fill that in or what's going on there? So even here I put NA, I like to fill every line in. It's just a general rule. You don't have to do it, but I find it is good practice. So no additional earnest money. We're not going to put down any additional earnest money, but this is the important one too, line 41. So buyer is requesting seller to pay compensation to selling broker at closing per the terms of the attached broker compensation rider. Now, a while back, I think when this first new contract came out, we said you can do either or. You can put your compensation in here, because it does say that this closing cost can be applied towards selling broker compensation. What we're encouraging everyone to do, and what the Board of Realtors is encouraging everyone to do, is utilize the broker compensation rider. Don't put it in here, put it here. So when you're asking the seller to pay compensation, use this rider. It's the cleanest way. It allows for less issues to come up, and it's basically stating your compensation is getting covered by the seller. So you could do either or, but we encourage everyone to utilize the broker compensation rider. So you're going to check this box here, and we'll go over that compensation rider here at the end. But you're going to check the box that you're including your broker compensation rider in the offer. So remember, there's 2 places to check here, here and then down a little bit further, which we'll get to in a moment. So questions on any of this on page 1? If you do, drop them in the comments, and we're going to keep moving through this. Method of financing. So this is an extremely, extremely, extremely important paragraph that the dates in this have some serious consequences if missed. So when I check the box, line 49, that this is contingent upon financing. This offer is contingent upon financing. That box gets checked. So your buyer has basically been pre-approved with the lender. And in order to purchase this house, they have to obtain financing to buy it. They cannot buy it with cash or anything like that. Or it's not, we're not checking not contingent. So this offer is contingent. Now, this is the important date. I put 2/7, which is just a little bit over 30 days out. So again, this is just an example, or 30 days after the acceptance deadline is what it auto-populates. Again, I recommend putting a date in here and not just leaving it for 30 days, because sometimes that 30 days could be a Sunday, or, and again, lenders might not be working on weekends. So make sure you put this on a date that falls during the week, and then make sure you're staying on your lender to hit this date. But here's what it is. So let's read through it. If buyer does not deliver written notice provided by buyer's lender to seller or listing broker of buyer's inability to obtain loan approval on the terms described below on or before the date that I put in here, which is February 7th, then this condition shall be deemed waived, and buyer's performance under this contract shall thereafter not be conditioned upon buyers obtaining financing. So what does that mean? That means if we pass this date, and let's just say we get to February 8th and the lender calls and says, we can't get your buyer approved anymore. Something happened. We had an appraisal issue. Let's say they have an appraisal issue and it's February 8th and it just popped up. Too late, right? We're beyond our loan commitment date. Your buyer, after this date passes, your buyer effectively becomes a cash buyer. So even though it didn't appraise and now they can't obtain financing, your buyer's in a really bad spot. So I can't talk enough about how important loan commitment dates are and how important it is to have a very close working relationship with your lender as well, and a lender that fully understands the importance of loan commitment also. This is not a date where it's like we want to get to February 7th and then call the listing agent and say, we need to extend loan commitment by a week. Well, why? We had 30 days to get it done. We just weren't staying on top of it. So this is a date that you want to make sure you stay on top of your lender. I'd be checking in with my lender weekly. When I get a house under contract, weekly check-in. How's everything going with loan commitment? Do you have all the documents that you need from the client? Are you still waiting on documents? Yeah, we've been reaching out to the client 5 or 6 times now. They haven't got us any of the docs we need. Maybe that's something you can help your lender with, and call your client and say, hey, our lender really needs this. We've got some deadlines here we have to hit. And I don't want to put you in a spot where you could financially be, it could put you in a bad spot here. So let's make sure we get these documents to the client by the end of the day. Is that fair? So that's stuff you can be working with your lender to help get documents in, because that happens a lot. Clients need to pull tax returns or W-2s, bank statements, stuff like that. They drag their feet on it, and that could be a reason why loan commitment gets pushed back. So don't just drop it in your lender's lap and say, good luck, go get them. Like, work as a team here to facilitate the smoothest transaction possible. So loan contingency, if you miss, I missed this one time early on, back in I don't remember, 2011 or something. I missed a loan commitment, and we did have an appraisal issue. And it was like I had a pit in my stomach, right? All of a sudden, my buyer, I got it worked out, obviously, but it's one of those things where just don't miss the date. All right, super important. You know about it. You're writing in your offer. Put it on your Google Calendar. Put it on for a week before loan commitment, and on your calendar, whatever calendar you use for the day of, to make sure you don't miss this date. But also don't amend and try to get loan commitment pushed the day of. That just makes it look like we don't have our stuff together. So very important here that now, if let's say, for instance, we're before, let's say it's February 1st and we get a loan denial, well, we need to send that in writing to the listing agent, letting them know that the buyer could not obtain financing, at which point then the buyer would get their earnest money back and the contract becomes terminated, follow with a mutual release, and then contract's dead. So if that happens, but again, very important. I know it was long-winded, but I talk about this paragraph a lot because it has some serious consequences, and it's one of the things that gets missed a lot by agents because they don't understand the importance of it. So make sure you understand it's important and never miss this date. You never want to miss it. Again, if loan contingency date passes without written notice as outlined above, buyer remains obligated under this contract. Therefore, buyer should be certain that he will have the funds to close. So again, cash buyer. If buyer's performance under this contract is to be independently conditioned upon the property appraising at a specific value, then buyer should complete and attach to this contract the appropriate appraisal rider, which we're going to do. But let's look here now, loan amount. So when I'm inserting my loan amount and my information here, I'm basically taking that information from the pre-approval letter that was given to me from the lender. So the lender is going to issue a pre-approval letter with terms on it. I'm going to take those terms and I'm going to say, okay, they said they're going to put 20% down, so my loan amount will be 80%. My initial rate is not to exceed 7%. I generally would do about a half a point more than whatever the current rate is. So What does that mean? Excuse me. So what does that mean? With my initial rate not to exceed, if I put a buyer under contract and let's say rates are 6% today, I know they're not, but just hypothetically, rates are 6% today. And then in a couple of weeks, rates shoot up to 8%. Now, again, that's a super strange example because it probably would never happen, but it could. But rates go way up. And all of a sudden, my buyer can't afford this property. Per this contract, because I put the initial rate not to exceed 7%, my buyers could get out of the contract. The rates have gone up substantially. And now my buyer is in a position where they can't afford the monthly payment. So put the rate in. I usually do about 0.5% higher than whatever the prevailing rate is at that time. If rates today are 6.5%, I'm going to put 7% there. That way, if rates do fire way up for some reason, I don't put my buyer. I put my buyer in a position where they can get out of the contract without feeling like a financial burden or pinch. So I'm going to put the rate not to exceed, amortization term, whatever the term is. Usually, most people are getting a 30-year loan, but if they're getting a 15, 10, whatever the case may be, and then I'm checking conventional if it's a conventional loan. Now, something to keep in mind too. Just because you put these terms in here does not like lock your buyer in to doesn't lock your buyer into going like using these terms. Like your buyer could say, oh, I'm only going to put 10% down now, or whatever the case may be, or they could put money down. So it's not like saying, well, in the contract now we put 80% that you're putting 20% down. You have to. They can adjust terms here, but it's just giving the seller too an idea of what kind of financing they're working with. I do put TBD. Is that okay? I would not do that, Kathy. I would put a specific amount because TBD, essentially what this is this is initial. Are you putting TBD for the rate or for just all of the financing? Because if you're putting it for all of the financing, I wouldn't recommend that either because it doesn't give the seller a good idea of like how much buying power your client really has. Because like this is one of the ways that we can look a little bit stronger is if we have strong financing. So we want to make sure we put that in. And then I would also not put the initial interest rate not to exceed TBD because that doesn't really help our client. Because if rates go up, as in my scenario, as I mentioned there, then there's no way for them to get out of it. It just says TBD, which doesn't help them. So I would definitely put a percentage point there. And again, I would do about 0.5% more than whatever the rate is today. If rates are 6% today, I would put 6.5, or if they're 6.5 today, I'm putting 7%. So I wouldn't put TBD because that's not going to protect your buyer at all. So hopefully that makes sense. Don't most lenders lock rates when qualifying? No, they don't lock a rate when qualifying. They lock a rate after they get an accepted contract. So your buyer is going to get a rate estimate today. Hey, today rates are 6.5%. And that doesn't lock them in though. They're not going to lock in rates most likely until after they're under contract. And it could be a couple of weeks after they're under contract as well. So no, they're not locked in yet. And then the same is true with like when building too, like builders, like you don't get, they don't lock in for quite a while. So keep that in mind. They don't lock in that time of pre-approval. They're locking in after an accepted offer has happened. And then because that lock rate is only good for a certain period of time. And I don't know offhand, I can't remember how many days that's good for. Call it 30 days. But then that lock rate would reset. So they're only going to lock their clients in on a rate after the house is under contract. So on a conventional loan, so loan type, conventional. I'm clicking conventional here. Now keep in mind, there are other loans available. There's FHA, which we all know is 3.5% down, which is a really good loan program for a lot of first-time homebuyers that maybe don't have a ton of funds to put down. VA, Veterans Administration, or veteran loan. So if people have served in the military or currently serving in the military qualify for a VA loan. It's 100% no money down loan, which is a really good loan as well. So if they're getting a VA loan, you would check that box. One box I didn't check was fixed rate. Most likely on my conventional loan, it's going to be fixed rate as well. Or if they're getting an adjustable rate mortgage, which we're not seeing a ton of those anymore because the adjustable rate mortgages, they don't, to be honest, the rate's just not that good. In the past, the adjustable rate mortgage was quite a bit lower than what the fixed rate was. So it made sense. Like that's what got us in a lot of trouble back in 2008. And that was so many people had adjustable rate mortgages. And then those mortgage rates shot up a couple percentage points when it was time and they couldn't refinance and they didn't have equity in their house and we got into a foreclosure crisis. So typically you're not going to check adjustable rate. So usually it's going to be either conventional FHA or VA. So you're going to check that there. Now, closing. I'm putting my closing date there. So what is a good closing date? A good closing date is whatever date is good for your buyer and for the seller. So there are lenders that can get closings done in a couple of weeks. There are lenders that can get closings done in 30 days. There are lenders that can get them done in 45 days, 60 days. Typically going beyond about 60 days on a closing, I wouldn't recommend. It gets a little bit long. That's kind of the max of where I put a closing. Usually your closing date is going to fall somewhere between 30 and 60 days from the date of contract acceptance. So if you do a 30-day closing, what I would recommend is your loan commitment would go about a week prior. So 30 days is a pretty quick closing. I would put my loan commitment 1 week prior to my closing. So it's giving the lender about 3 weeks to get everything done, appraisal, all of that done. If you're going a little bit further, like I did here, I went a little bit beyond. So I put my loan commitment as February 7th. My closing is February 21. Basically what that means is by February 7th, my loan commitment, lender has all of the documents, everything's verified, it's gone through underwriting, everything's approved, the appraisal's done, no issues there. We are good to go. We're just waiting to get to closing now. So generally keep that in mind. If I do a 30-day closing, I do my loan commitment 1 week prior. If I'm pushing out beyond that, I'll typically give the lender about 30 days for loan commitment and then close a week or two after that. So your closing date is there. Now, another line too that gets a little bit of a confusion. It says title will pass. So look here on 79. So I also go to 78. I put Freedom Title. Whatever title company you're using, you put there. And then title will pass when the sale is closed. Seller to deliver possession of the property and keys to buyer no later than, I typically check closing. So basically what that means is that when closing occurs and this is checked, your buyer can now take possession of the property. Even though tons of agents like it hasn't funded yet, this or that, if I'm checking closing, that means if I've closed and the seller's closed, even though maybe it hasn't funded yet, your buyer can take possession per the contract. Or if I write in a specific time and date here, you can do that too. So take possession of the property and keys to buyer no later than closing or the time of, but in no event prior to closing as defined above. All parties agree to sign closing documents at a time frame that facilitates this possession. If possession is to be delivered on a day other than closing as defined above, parties shall complete the appropriate rider. So if your clients are going to take possession of the property prior to closing, that's a possession prior to closing rider. We're not going to talk about that today, but we do have a riders training coming up here in a couple of weeks where we'll cover that. So just make sure too, you're staying in touch with the seller's agent, letting them know, hey, we've got our buyer scheduled. We're closing. Generally, it's probably a good idea that you close your buyer a little bit earlier in the day. So your buyer's closed maybe first thing in the morning. It gives plenty of time for everything to fund, to go through, no issues. But just make sure you're keeping up with the seller's agent as well. Hey, we're closing tomorrow at 9 a.m. Just wanted to let you know. And then you coordinate your buyer taking possession, getting keys, access to the property, everything like that. Don't give your clients access to the property before closing. Don't let them move in a day, a week before, even if the house is vacant. Huge no-no. So don't do that. We had an issue with that pop up the other day. Client moved into a vacant foreclosure property a week or two before closing. Agent was unaware they moved in. They somehow got access or gained access illegally to the property, and the bank made them move everything out. So that will happen. Don't let your clients, that can be a huge issue. Don't let your clients move in prior to closing. So, all right, let's talk about riders. Here's one other thing. Let me throw this into this note. Parties are cautioned to always call to confirm instructions before sending any funds via wire transfer. There have been so many issues popping up with fraudulent emails that look very similar to an email from the title company sending to client. We haven't, knock on wood, we haven't had any cases with us, but nationally, lots of issues coming up where clients are getting emails from what looks like the title company saying, hey, here are the funds, here's the wiring instructions, things of that nature. And then these clients are wiring money to that email, to those instructions on the email, and it's going to a fraudulent company or people that are stealing the money. So let's make sure if we're a client, you let them know, hey, if you receive any kind of documents from our title company with wiring instructions or anything like that, let me know. let's talk about that first, and let's make 100% sure it's legitimate, because wire fraud does exist. So you want to make sure that 100% certainty that email was sent to the title company, or from that title company, and it's not like an email that looks very, very good. Some of these people, these scammers, are getting very good at making things look very, very legitimate. So keep that in mind, very important. Now let's move on to the riders. So the riders section here, we are, in this scenario, I'm going to attach an appraisal rider. Now, the appraisal rider means the property has to appraise out. And again, we'll go through this during the rider section. I'm attaching an appraisal rider. Something to keep in mind, a conventional loan will always get an appraisal rider. If I go, let's go back to our financing. If my client was getting an FHA loan, I do not need an appraisal rider now. What I need to include is the FHA loan provision rider. This is something that gets missed a lot by newer agents as well, is that they check appraisal rider and the FHA rider. It is not necessary. The FHA rider, in a sense, is the appraisal rider. So if I'm getting an FHA loan, I would check FHA, and I would check FHA loan provision rider and attach that document with my offer. I do not check appraisal. Appraisal is only for a conventional loan, or if the buyer was wanting to pay cash, but they still wanted an appraisal for some reason, you would attach an appraisal rider. So FHA, I'm checking FHA. VA, if they're getting a VA loan, I'm checking VA loan provision rider. I am not checking appraisal. So again, appraisal is only for conventional. FHA for FHA. If it's a VA loan, I'm attaching the VA loan provision rider. So doing that there. And then I'm also checking for the second time, we checked this on page 1, but I'm checking it here in line 97 as well, my broker compensation rider. So I'm attaching my broker compensation rider, which is stating what we're asking the seller to pay to compensate us. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a franchise disclosure. We're not a franchise, so we don't have to worry about this, but there is a disclosure if the company is a franchise. Title work and survey. This is another important one. So typically in the state of Missouri, the buyer is going to order, provide, and purchase title. So line 117, you would check that. It's very normal in Missouri for the buyer to order, provide, and purchase their own title. So what this means, buyer may, at buyer's option and expense, order a title examination and commitment to issue an owner's and or lender's policy of title insurance in the latest Alta form, including mechanics lien coverage from title company specified in paragraph 5. Title. So the title company that they choose to use is going to do the title rundown, the title search, making sure that when they take possession of this property and buy this property, there's no liens, clouds on the title, judgments, anything like that. So they're ensuring, the title company is ensuring that the buyer is getting this property free and clear on title with no issues related to the title. So that's where there's title fees associated with this. So the title company does their title search, the title examination. Their fees go on the Alta at closing, the closing statement, and then the buyer pays for it at that time. So it comes out of their down payment and things of that nature. So here's the important dates though. 25 days right here. So again, it says 25 if none stated. Even if I want to write in 25 is usually a pretty good number. So I just write in 25 days though. Let me backtrack real quick. If your client's getting a survey, a stake survey, if they want a survey done, something to keep in mind on surveys. If generally a survey is good for about 10 years. So you could ask the listing agent, hey, does your client have a survey? Do they have a survey for the property? Oh yeah, when they moved into the house 5 years ago, they had a survey done. Would you mind sharing that with us? They share that with you. You can send that to title. Generally, they can use that survey, and your client, you can save your client $400 or $500, whatever the cost is for a new survey. So if there is a survey available, I would get that, send it to title. They can typically use that survey, and then it's going to save your client some money. If there's no survey though, and your client wants one, get a stake survey done. The spot survey, which is the SRPR, line 123 there, it doesn't really do a whole lot. It's kind of like best guess scenario, especially like I had an example early on in my career. We got a spot survey done for my client, and then they moved in and they wanted to put a fence in. I didn't know this, but they wanted to put a fence in, so then they had to pay for a stake survey as well. So I could have saved them money by not doing the spot survey, and we just paid for the stake survey right out from out of the gate. So ask your clients questions about that too. Do you intend to put a fence in, a pool, anything of that nature? We should get a survey done. Now, a couple of things where, like city properties, You have 100-year-old city properties that already have fences and garages and everything's been up, and typically those lines are pretty messed up, meaning there's fences on neighbors' yards, things like that. But I recommend every person gets a survey done if the property doesn't already have one, because let's just say we had this happen on a property, an investment property I bought. There was a fence was 6 feet on the neighbor's yard. So there's a fenced-in backyard when we bought the house, and a survey was done, and it was 6 feet on the neighbor's yard. Now, if you have a buyer and they get a survey done, now that becomes the seller's responsibility to take care of that and get that issue resolved. If your client doesn't get a survey, and then let's say 4 or 5 years from now they want to sell the house and they call you, you come out, get the house listed, you get an offer, that new buyer gets a survey done, they say, oh wait, that fence is 6 feet on the neighbor's yard, I want you guys to fix that. Now that becomes your client's problem, where it could have become the seller's problem prior when your buyer was purchasing the property. Now it's your client's responsibility to get that fixed before they can sell or close on the house. So I recommend everybody get a survey done if there's not one done. Things come up all the time. Driveways are put on neighbors' property lines. Swing sets are put on neighbors' property lines. Fences are a big one. So get a stake survey done. Highly recommend it. Now, the 25 days. What this is if there's any defects discovered as a result of the title examination, title commitment, or the survey, and if buyer chooses to act on this contingency, buyer shall within 25 days, if none stated after the 25 days after the acceptance deadline, furnish a copy of the document evidencing the defect to the seller or listing broker, stating in writing any title or survey defects that are unacceptable to buyer, not listed above, so on and so forth. What does that mean? That means that if within my 25 days here, I get my survey done and I get all of the title work done, and we find out there's an encroachment on the property. There's a fence that's on our property line. It's the neighbor's fence, but it's on our property line. We want it moved. We have the right then to submit in writing to the agent requesting that they get that taken care of. Or maybe there's a mechanics lien that the seller had a basement finished and they didn't pay one of the contractors, and the contractors filed a lien on the property. That has to get resolved by the seller prior to closing. Now, if I fall beyond my 25 days, this is where it gets a little bit gray. If I'm beyond my 25 days and now I just get a survey done and I go back and say, oh, I want this fence removed, well, we're beyond that 25-day period. It gets a little bit sticky. So make sure if you're getting surveys ordered, get them ordered right away. Let the title company know, they'll get it ordered for you. And then that's why that title work and survey order form is very important. Make sure we get that filled out and turned in to the title company. And then make sure if there's any issues, we get this in writing to the agent immediately, to the listing agent, within our 25-day period. So again, keeping in touch with your seller, your title company. Hey, we're on day 20 right now. We only have 25 days. How's everything looking on title? Are we going to have clear title within the next 5 days? I saw the survey's been ordered. Do we have that back yet? Are there any issues? Keep in touch with your title. So again, when you get these properties under contract, utilizing your calendar to set dates and reminders to reach out to your lender, to reach out to your title company. We're going to talk about home inspection here in a moment. Very, very important. So make sure, again, that's important stuff. Adjustments and closing costs. Again, if you have questions on this, write them or drop them in the comments. Adjustments and closing costs. Adjustments, charges, and closing costs are agreed to be paid by parties subject to riders 2135 FHA or VA and current VA regulations as follows. So buyer shall pay. If this is on page 1, if you're asking for closing costs, what can your closing costs cover? So line 150 here, buyer shall pay for, where applicable, hazard insurance premiums and flood insurance premiums, if provided by lender, survey and title company charges, any charges imposed by the lender, building, termite, environmental inspections, fair market value oil, heating oil, propane. Basically what they're saying is a lot of the closing costs you're getting from the seller can cover the bulk of the fees listed here. So just keep that in mind. It can cover lender fees, title fees, surveys, appraisals, inspections in a lot of regards. So it can cover a lot of fees from that aspect. And this is a list of some of the fees that your buyer may incur when getting an offer. One thing I want to mention too, this propane gas, heating oil and propane gas. If you are writing on a property that has a propane tank that uses propane for heat, typically you need to negotiate a cost associated with that, because sometimes the seller will say, well, no, we're going to have the propane tank emptied, or we're taking the propane tank with us. We were just renting it, or or we own the propane tank, we want to make sure that we're taking it with us. So figure that out ahead of time. If the property's on propane, figure out, is it leased or is it owned? How much propane is in there? When was it last filled? How much is in there? And then you figure out like a credit, basically, to credit how much is in there. Let's say there's $500 worth of propane in there that your buyer is going to get to use. The seller may ask for your buyer to pay for that. So propane is something that pops up. And also septic. I would ask to have the septic tank cleared prior to your client taking. So there's septic inspections. Again, we'll talk about that in the inspections, but septic too, making sure that that's cleared out, it's pumped out prior to your client taking possession of the property, because you don't want to have them move in and the septic tank is 80%, 90% full. So making sure that's cleared out ahead of time is important. I had a question come in. Surveys are important for rural and land deals too, especially when clients who inherit or purchase land. Absolutely. Yeah. And surveys. And keep in mind too, on surveys, like survey cost varies based on lot size. So the survey for a 1/4 acre lot is going to be substantially less than a 25 acre piece of ground. So just keep that in mind too. Survey cost. We had an agent back in the day, didn't realize that. And he told the client he would cover the cost of the survey. It was like a 12 acre piece of property. He thought it would be like $400 or $500, and it ended up being a couple grand, a couple $1,000. So keep that in mind too. Get pricing on that. Very important. Seller shall pay. So here's some of the seller expenses that they could incur during the sale of the property as well, listed here. So again, I recommend everybody read. We're not going to read every single line, but I definitely recommend you read through this. It's very, very important. Buyer and seller shall have prorated and adjusted between them on a basis of 30 days to the month as the date of closing. Seller to pay for the last current rents, if there was rents which get collected, general taxes. So the seller's going to pay for all of the taxes up until the day of closing. And then generally they get your buyer gets a credit for that. And then your buyer would be responsible for the tax bill at the end of the year. District improvements, subdivision upkeep, assessments. So any kind of things like that, they're making sure that all of those assessments and fees are current prior to your client taking ownership of that. And then let's look at inspections. This is an important one as well. This is one that gets, we run into issues on it. So inspections, generally it's 10 days. Again, I just fill 10 in, even though it says 10 if none stated. After the acceptance, the inspection period, the buyer may purchase one or more written home inspection reports from any independent qualified inspector of the property improvements deemed necessary. So this is everything from, they're doing home inspections. You can do sewer lateral, you can do radon, you can do termite. They're inspectors that do these infrared things to see if there's any kind of moisture in the walls, things like that. So what we're doing though is within 10 days of the acceptance deadline date, we are going to have our clients get their inspections done, and the inspector is going to put a report together. Now, here's something important to remember. When you have a buyer, one, you want to let your buyer know, listen, it's the home inspector's job to find everything about this property as much as they can, to make this property, like everything wrong with this property as much as possible. This is not every single house. Even if it's a new construction house, inspectors will find something. That's their job. So we're not looking for little nitpick things like, hey, there's a little bit of a nick in the wall or a baseboard. We're really looking for big ticket items like, is the electrical panel current? Is the roof okay? The HVAC, the plumbing, big ticket items is what we're looking for on home inspections. We're not looking to like write out a 100-page list of things we want fixed. Like, hey, there's a scratch on the floor, there's this or that. It's more for big ticket items. So making sure we know that. But here's what's going to happen. Well, let's read through the rest of this real quick. So buyer's inspection period will end upon delivery of the inspection notice described below or the time period stated above, whichever occurs first. What that means is that it's going to, if I get my inspections done, say on day 3, and I submit my inspection notice on what I want fixed to the listing agent, well, then this inspection period ends and the new one starts, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But it's this inspection period ends when I submit my inspection notice to the agent, whichever occurs first. Failure by buyer to purchase and perform an inspection with the time period stated above shall constitute a waiver and acceptance of any conditions an inspection would have disclosed. Buyer should contact law enforcement officials for information pertaining to whether registered sex offenders or other convicted criminals reside in the area. Within the inspection period, buyer shall furnish a written inspection notice to seller or listing broker stating one of the following. So we get our inspections done. The sex offenders thing too. I think that's an important thing as well. I'm not sure. Somebody watching may know. Like, where's the database you search for that? I don't know, but I think that's a good idea too. Like, probably not a bad idea to put in your process to have them look that up, because maybe they move into the house and they find out there's a sex offender right next door. That could be an issue. I don't know. So it might not be a bad idea for people to know that ahead of time. So if anyone knows if like the database you search on that, drop it in the comments. I would greatly appreciate it. So here's what's happening though. Leo just dropped it in. Cool. Thank you. It looks like there's a link there where you can check for that. So he just dropped it in the comments. So it might not be a bad idea to let your clients know, hey, you might just want to check this out. It's, per our contract here, there is buyers should contact law. Yeah. So it's a good idea to contact law enforcement or maybe utilize this website for anything, relating to seeing if there are any registered sex offenders in the area. Tammy says the State Highway Patrol has a link and keeps the data. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So not a bad idea. Add that in your process to recommend your buyers doing that. Maybe just document an email and send it to them and let them know. So here's what happens now. When we get this 10-day inspection period, we get our inspections done. Inspector sends us a report. We go through it with our client and we put a list together of things we want to have fixed. Now we have 3 options when we have this report. The first one is, and this also states on your inspection notice, buyer is satisfied with inspections. Delivery of inspection reports to seller or listing broker is not required. If seller or listing broker has not received the written inspection notice by the end of the inspection period, buyer shall be deemed to be satisfied with the results of any inspections. So let's say your client's like, no, we're good with everything. We don't want to ask for anything. We're okay with it. Let's move forward. Then what I would recommend is you get the inspection notice and you check the box that states basically the verbiage in line 1 here. So the inspection notice is a separate document. And I would then put that into the inspection notice and say, my client is happy with everything. They check the box. Now, why would we do that rather than just let the 10-day period run out? Because if we let the 10-day period run out, there's nothing really documented saying your client was satisfied, and they can't come back and say, hey, we wanted to ask for this. We didn't realize we had to do it within this 10-day period. So documentation is key in contracts. So make sure that you fill out an inspection notice, check the box saying buyer satisfied. Your buyer signs off on that, and then you can submit it to the listing agent, and now we're good. That contingency is resolved. Had a question pop up here. Can you explain line 125 is required for full survey coverage in an owner's policy? How does it cover something that may not be accurate? Let's go back to 125 real quick. Okay, so a stake survey is generally required in order to obtain full survey coverage in an owner's policy of title insurance. An SRPR, also known as a spot survey, may or may not disclose all of the defects involving such a matters of encroachments, overlaps, boundary lines, or acreage discrepancies. So what that means is if you get a spot survey done, your title company will not fully cover the survey. And they're going to say basically like in their survey or their title insurance policy, if somebody comes back a year from now and says, oh, wait a minute, this fence is on my property, I want you to move it, it's not covered under the title insurance policy because a stake survey was not done. So a spot survey is somewhat of a like a guess in a lot of regards. They're basically saying, here's where we feel your property lines are. Here's where we feel this stuff is. But a stake survey, they're actually going to go out and find the little monuments, put it into the ground, and they're going to give you your exact boundary lines of where your property lies. And that way it can be fully covered. That's why I often say the SRPR, the spot survey, is kind of worthless in a lot of regards, in my opinion. I think if you're going to have a survey, spend a little bit more money, get the stake, then your title company is going to cover or insure, give you full owner's policy of title insurance, and you know exactly where your boundary lines are. So that's in a nutshell what that means. Let me see here. So it's not covering. That's why it's not going to cover. If you get a SRPR spot survey, it's not going to cover it. So make sure you get the stake survey. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So next thing is buyer is terminating the contract with earnest money to be returned. So I can either say my buyer's satisfied, they're happy, or at this point they can terminate. As long as we're within our 10-day window, we can send an inspection notice saying we're terminating and we're going to get our earnest money returned to us. So to return to buyer subject to paragraph 12, in this case, buyers shall have purchased one or more home inspection reports from an independent qualified inspector as provided for above, which together cover substantial structural elements and systems of the property. Buyer shall provide such reports to seller if requested by seller. So you have to have the inspection report done. It has to be an inspection report. It can't just be like an uncle that's a contractor is going to go in there and say, nope, this property is not good. It has to be a qualified inspection company, has to go and do the inspection, give you a report. You submit the inspection notice saying that I am walking away from the contract. And then if they ask for the reports, you have to send them to the seller. The third option is your buyer is willing to close upon the satisfaction of the requirement set forth in the inspection notice, which may be accompanied by a complete copy of the report. So you could submit your report now, your reports, inspection reports, and then also in the inspection notice state what you want fixed by the seller. So you're going to state, hey, we want licensed qualified contractor to repair the HVAC, so on and so forth. When we get into the riders training, we'll go more in depth. But typically what we see is option 3, buyers will submit what they want fixed, and then it goes into a negotiation. Now a new 10-day window sets up here where within 10 days after we submit what we want fixed to the seller, a new 10-day window starts where we have to get it resolved. So the first 10-day window, we have to get all of our inspections done. Once we submit, a new 10-day window starts, and then we have to get everything resolved, meaning buyer and seller have to agree that we're agreeing to get the repairs as necessary fixed and move forward. So again, we'll get deeper into that on the inspection notice training. Home warranty, you can either check if buyer is acknowledging seller's not providing one. You would check this box. If the seller is offering one, or you're going to ask the seller to pay for one, check this box as well. Put a dollar amount in here, and then also put the name of the home warranty company you wish to use. So important there. Insurability, this is an important one as well. You have 10 days. Make sure your client knows that within 10 days after the acceptance deadline or the contract acceptance, they need to contact their insurance company, tell them they're purchasing a home, and that they need to get insurance on it. So this is an important date as well, because sometimes, let's say the roof isn't insurable. We don't want to wait until after the 10-day period. So make sure that they contact the insurance company as soon as they get the house under contract and let them know they're buying a house, and obtain quotes for insurance. Very, very important. Governmental inspections and occupancy. If the property falls in an area where there's a municipal or government inspection, the seller has 15 days to get their governmental inspection, occupancy inspections, what we typically call them, to get that done. And then they could then fix anything that's on that inspection, or they could come to your buyer if it's within the 15-day period and say, hey, we got this inspection report back and there's 10 items here. We're not going to fix any of them. So if your buyer wants to move forward, they can fix these items, and that way they can get occupancy. So as long as it's within that 15-day period, the seller can negotiate the inspections. Now, if the seller waits until after the 15-day period, then they are required to fix any items that come up on that governmental report. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll dive deeper into that when we get into inspections. Buyer intends to have no more than however many people are going to occupy the property. List that here. Lawn irrigation system. If the property has a sprinkler system, make sure they have the appropriate documentation on a backflow inspection. That's really important. So make sure that typically when a company closes out their sprinkler system or opens it, they give a certified backflow inspection. So make sure they have that. That is part of our contract. So if there is a sprinkler system, just ask if they have the backflow. Earnest money. Buyer and seller agree that the earnest money received by the escrow agent in connection with this contract shall be deposited within 10 banking days after the acceptance deadline. These are important too. Make sure your client, how can you determine the limit on how many people can be in the property? You know, that's a municipality thing. Most of the time, I've only heard it being an issue one time. It was somewhere in North County. I can't remember which municipality, but there was like 8 people going to occupy, and it was too many. I think the limit was like 6. I don't know the exact answer on that one, Joanne. So I would say reaching out to the municipalities and asking, and we'll see if we can find some sort of document on that as well. But I don't know offhand the exact answer to that, but we'll definitely find out and let everybody know. Earnest money though, make sure it gets turned in. Very important. So make sure your client is turning that in. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Remedies and loss. So this is basically stating that if either party defaults in the performance of the obligation of this contract, the party claiming a default shall notify the other party in writing of the nature of default and his election of remedy. So this is where things start to go south and things start to get a little bit haywire. This is where documentation becomes key. If we start having issues with the contract and people are starting to not follow timelines, things of that nature, start documenting everything. Emails, document your emails, recap conversations. That's a big thing I highly recommend. If you have a conversation with your client or the listing agent, send an email right after that recapping what the conversation was. Just wanted to send an email recapping our conversation. You had stated that your client was going to do this, 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 and this by such date. Make sure you recap. Very, very important. Loss. Risk of loss. 2 improvements of the property shall be borne by the seller until title is transferred. What does that mean? That means if it's the night before closing, the house burns down, it is still the seller's responsibility. So that's what loss is. It's still the seller's responsibility until title has passed. Even if, let's say, we close the morning, our buyer goes and closes, seller hasn't closed yet, house burns down that morning, still the seller's property. Until title has passed and is basically funded, it's still the seller's responsibility to make sure they're taking care of that property. Assignability of contract. This contract is assignable by buyer, so you could assign it to another buyer, but it has to have not without written consent of the seller. So very important there as well. Miscellaneous provisions. Time is of the essence. Basically making sure we're staying. Here's the one. All reference to a specified time shall mean central time, so our time zone. Making sure your clients are staying up on contract terms and not just sitting on stuff for days and days and days. Making sure we're staying to it. Foreign investment in real estate, the FIRPTA. Seller represents that this is not a foreign person as described in foreign investment. So making sure that they're not, that they don't fall under this category, and agrees to deliver a certification at closing to the effect which contains seller's tax ID number or green card. So in order to sell a property, you have to have a tax ID or green card to sell a property. Construction, words and phrases shall be construed as singular or plural, so on and so forth. At the end here, with the exception of the term banking days as used in paragraph 12, as defined a 24-hour calendar day. So that means that 7 days a week, our contracts, the 10 days are not just business days. Saturdays and Sundays do count. Here's what I want to get you to. Access final walkthrough. Very important. I recommend when you're working with a buyer, you do a final walkthrough and you fill out a final walkthrough notice. This is your buyer walking through the property and stating that they are happy with the property, everything looks good, and they are moving forward to closing. If you don't fill that out and then your buyer moves in and says, wait a minute, there's issues here or this or that, it could be a problem. So make sure you fill out the final walkthrough in utilities and do a final walkthrough notice. You're going to walk through prior to closing. If there are things wrong with the property on that final walkthrough notice, you submit what you want fixed. And we will talk more about that again in the writers training in just a couple of weeks. Make sure that the property is not in a floodplain. You can check that on the MLS. There's flood maps, very, very important. Special agreements. This would be if you wanted to write anything like exclusions, things like that can be written in here. And then square footage. We're not an expert in measuring square footage. A lot of times the square footage is pulled from the tax records, just making sure your clients know that as well. Check the box that it's seller's disclosure. If your client has read the seller's disclosure, make sure that that is checked. If there is no seller's disclosure, then that's checked here as well. And then big one here, we represent our clients as designated agents. So you're going to check the box designated agent if you're representing your buyer. And then you're going to check the MLS. You can check the MLS to see what the licensee assisting the seller is. Are they a designated agent or a buyer's agent? Or you can leave it blank and let them check it. Sources of compensation. I'm going to check seller. And then if I charge an additional fee on top of the compensation I'm asking the seller to pay, I would check buyer as well. If I don't charge additional broker compensation, then I would just have the seller pay that. So if on my buyer agency, it just says 3%, I'm going to have my seller, then I would only need to check buyer. So if I'm wanting both people, if I'm charging additional comp over, then I want to check buyer and seller. If I don't charge additional compensation, I just check seller. Hopefully that makes sense. We put our information here, Network Global, and put all of your agent information here. You can fill this in for the seller or let them fill it in. Either way is fine. I generally say about 24 hours of response time is good. You put your clients' names, and there we go. So sorry I had to rush to the end there. I got a meeting actually starting right now. I have to jump on, but hopefully that makes sense. Again, we're going to go through the financial riders. I did have a question. Is title company responsible for getting proof of green card? Yeah, I would work with title, but they're going to catch that or should catch that, and they will let you know. So title generally will help with getting the green cards and making sure that all of that is there. Lisa, yes. But here we go. Network Global. You put the license number, you put your name, your license number, your date, your MLS ID, put the acceptance time, and then you get your clients to sign and submit the offer. So hope that makes sense. Hope that helps. Again, a couple of weeks, we're going through the financial training rider. But that's all we've got for today. I appreciate everybody being on, and we'll talk very soon. So if you have questions, drop them in. We'll hang out for a couple of minutes, and I got to jump on another call. So thank you, everybody. Hopefully that was helpful. We'll talk very soon. Thank you.